Summing. So summing is what happens when you have multiple audio tracks sending signal out of each of the outputs of the individual tracks, and all of those tracks are added together to combine to one output or one signal. Now if we scroll over to our master fader, we'll notice that this sign right here is the summing sign and used in mathematics and such. And that's because that's what is occurring with the master fader here. And as you can see, we do have this turned down because it gets pretty loud. But you'll notice that something happens if I turn this up. And you might want to make sure you might want to turn your speakers down a little bit because this is going to be louder. But what happens is right now, we just talked about unity gain, and all of our tracks are at unity gain. Some of these tracks, if we take a look over in our other window here, some of these tracks are pretty hot, or the gain of the individual wave files is pretty high. So what's going to happen is all of these wave files, all of these signals are adding together, and you've got everything happening at unity. So what's going to happen is they're going to be piling on top of each other. And so even though the individual output of each track is not going red, the sum of everything added together is going to be red. So it's going to be distorting this master bus. So have a listen here. It might be a little loud, but just I warned you. So you notice how it does go red here, and you notice when I pull this down that it turns down with me, and that's because unlike all the rest of the tracks, the master fader is post fader metering. Okay, now let's see what happens as we start to raise some of these tracks. Okay, so as we raise these things, we get more and more distortion. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and manage our tracks a little bit. I'm going to put on the all group, hold option, and first of all turn everything to unity gain. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and turn everything down a little bit there, about -6 dB. Okay, and then I'm going to take all off. And I'm going to go back in all of my auxiliaries and submixes and masters. I'm going to option click and put them back to 0. Because remember, we set up our submixes before. And so this is just going to be the summing of just these 5 choir tracks. Just like the drums are going to be the summing of these tracks. And then it goes from there on to our master. So we're going to try to keep all those at 0 and watch what happens now that I've turned all these individual tracks down 6 dB each. Okay, now if we command click on the meter here, we can actually see what the peak is. Okay, so it was 0 before. Okay, so now we are at -2.4 our peak. So we've lowered everything 6 dB, and now we're still only hitting -2.4 dB away from 0. So we were quite a bit into the red. So you'll notice that what happens is that the summing, it's all these things adding together. I mean, think about it this way. Think if we had 12, 16 cups of water that were halfway full, and we try to take all those cups of water and throw them into a pitcher, that pitcher is going to fill up with water because everything's kind of adding together. Okay, so it's the same thing here. If we took and pumped up all of these things, just like if we, instead of having halfway full cups of water, if they were all full and we threw them all together in the pitcher, it is probably going to overflow the pitcher. And so the same thing is true with summing, that most of the time, if your tracks are a nice hot level, you're going to have to bring your faders down in order to make sure that you're not distorting the master output. Okay, and then in addition to that, as we start adding our plugins and such, we're going to be adding gain to it too, and we're going to be making our mix hotter and each individual track have a hotter output. And what that's going to do is it's going to start reading the output. And so what we're doing here by turning all these tracks down is we're giving ourselves more headroom here, so there's more room to have potential gain and be able to add gain. So right now, negative 2.4 dB gives us some headroom, and that's good, but we could have even more than that. We could even lower these tracks more. So let's go ahead and talk some more about some of these things in the next video.